Well, when I was 19 years old, I took out a little notebook, and it was one of the first things I wrote down for this book that I was to write 40 years later. And I wrote a note to myself. It said, "Dear Wayne," and I still have it, "don't die with your music still in you." And it became a theme in my life that all of us show up here into this world. We are intended here by a source from which all things are intended. Everything comes from that source. And everything that you needed for this physical journey was in that moment of your conception and even before. But most of us have let go of that dream. Or we don't know how powerful we are. When I was in the 3rd grade, I came home from school, and I said to Mrs. Scarf, which is the lady whose home we lived in, she had 52-some children living in that home, I said, "What's a scurvy elephant?" She said, "A what?" I said, "A scurvy elephant." She said, "Where did you hear that?" I said, "Well, I heard Mrs. Poole, who was my 3rd grade teacher, telling Mrs. Smith, who was the principal, outside of the classroom that Wayne Dyer was in her classroom and that he was a scurvy elephant." She got on the telephone and she called the principal, and the principal said, "Oh, that's Wayne. He gets everything mixed up." She didn't say that he was a scurvy elephant in her classroom. She said that he was a disturbing element in her classroom. And I think you have to understand that becoming a scurvy elephant or a disturbing element is a part of the process of not dying with your music still in you. That there is something that you showed up here to become, just like there was something that allowed you to grow into this body that you're in. The same force, the same field of intention that intended you here to be in this body, in the shape that it is in the size that it is, in the color that it is, in the shape of its eyes, in the color of its hair, whether you have any or don't, whether it falls out or doesn't, all of that. It was all intended here. And also everything that you were to become. And there is a sense inside of you, someplace in a very quiet place, an inner sense, an inner Tahiti, an inner island of peace that knows. You know that you're not this body that you're in. You know where it's going. You know it showed up from nowhere. Nowhere. And when it went from nowhere, it showed up in now here. Nowhere. It's all the same, just a little question of spacing. So now you're in now here, most of you. And you look around and you look at yourself and you watch your body go through its motions, and where the hell do you think it's going? Back to nowhere. From nowhere to now here to nowhere. But while it's here, there is something burning inside every one of us. And all we have to do is understand that strangest secret. And the strangest secret is we become what we think about. Our thoughts are the magic elixir. I remember being in that orphanage, and a snowstorm would come, and there were 2 snow shovels in the basement of that house. And I took that snow shovel that was downstairs. There were 2. One had the edges all curled up, and you couldn't make much money with a snow shovel with edges that were curled up. There was another bright, shiny one that Mr. Scarf had made himself. And I used to go down there when it would start snowing, and it seemed to snow a lot more in those days than it does today. And I would sleep with that snow shovel. And I would go outside at 5 o'clock in the morning, wake myself up, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would shovel everybody's walk on Tucker Street. Everybody. I didn't ask if it was okay and would you like me to and could I and maybe and so on. I just took the initiative and I went out there and shoveled their snow. And then I went back later that morning with my best little Oliver routine, because I was cute. It may not look like it now, but I was then. Cute little blonde hair, and I had little, and I would stand there, and I would just tell them that I shoveled your snow for you this morning. And sometimes I get a nickel or a dime. I even got a quarter a couple of times. Doesn't sound like much, but that's $4,000 in today's money, okay? And it wasn't like there was something in here that said, this is what you do, and you act upon what it is that you feel in here, because that thought that you have is something in the Course in Miracles that says, when I take this microphone to speak, and I'm being introduced as Gary was introducing me, I repeat a line from A Course in Miracles. And the line that I repeat says, if you knew who walked beside you at all times on this path that you have chosen, you could never experience fear or doubt again. You couldn't do it if you had a knowing that you weren't alone. If you knew it from in here with that burning desire. And it is that connection, it is the ability to go and connect to that.
Years ago, my wife and I were going through some personal difficulties. We were making a decision about whether or not we were going to stay together, very frankly. Everybody in a relationship, I believe, has these moments and times when there's a struggle and you've been together for a while and you're not certain whether this is the right path, and you're thinking about these things and so on. And nevertheless, it was a very difficult time emotionally for both of us. And I can remember years and years ago, as we were going through this, what it did for me to be in that state. I became much more loving. I became much more concerned with other people. I became less concerned with the pettiness of so many things that you find yourself worked up about, because I had a different focus in my life. And I can remember thinking, as we resolved it and got back closer together, and today are very close and very loving together, looking back on that time as like something that I had to go through at that time. And that what it did is it helped me to see how absurd it is for us to be focused on the minutia of life. Whether or not the walls are clean, or whether or not the toys are put away, or whether or not your food is prepared on time, or whether somebody is late with something, or whether the phone doesn't ring or does ring or whatever. Like, all of those things are so minute in contrast to what you're really struggling with. And then what it also helped me to do in terms of getting this big picture was to look at some of the things that other people were going through, some of the problems and difficulties that they were having. Very often when something goes wrong in somebody else's life that we're close to, one of our parents gets ill, there's an accident of some kind. When Marilyn had that accident, I can remember how it affected me. And it gives you pause to remind yourself that you have a lot to be thankful for, and that you have a very powerful mind here that can make anything happen that you want to happen, as long as you keep yourself centered or keep yourself focused. I was able to shift from all of those petty little things. And I look back on that now and I think, well, that's what I had to learn. That's what it was for, that there's a purpose in everything, and that perhaps one of the things that I had to learn 8 or 10 years ago was how to be more compassionate. And perhaps the only way I was going to learn how to be more compassionate was to have to go through some of this stuff myself. So, like, you can do that. You can do that now in your own life. Know that there's a lesson in this for you. Know that there are no accidents in this perfect universe. And know that the deep troubles that you may be experiencing or may be hard for you have something in them for you. And that there's a secondary purpose to them. And if it does help you to slow down, and if it does help you to get a bigger picture, and it does help you to be more compassionate and more loving towards other people, then what you do is you begin to bless those things that are in your own life as offering you an opportunity to transcend them. And once you've transcended them, then you don't have to go back to that again. And for sure, my wife and I do not have to go back to ever doubting whether we want to make it, and whether we want our family to stay intact, and whether we want to stay loving, and so on. We don't ever have to question that again. We've been there, and we both learned how to look within. And when you do look within, to be grateful for what this person is offering you. So that every time I think about my wife behaving in a way that I don't like, or vice versa. We've learned how to zip it, how to just not make ourselves miserable by saying things and by doing things that will just create more difficulties. Because we've been on the edge. We've been to that edge, and we've looked over the edge and seen what it's like to maybe have to raise a family as a single parents or whatever, and to be without each other. And now we're a tremendous source of strength to each other, instead of looking for the things that we don't like. So the way to the big picture often is through seeing the problems in your own life from a different perspective. And you begin to say to yourself, how can I apply the awareness of these thoughts and how I use my mind to make my life all that I want it to be, to bring into my life the things that are important to me, to improve the quality of my relationships, to have the success and so on that I think that I'm entitled to. And it's really getting to the point where you know that every thought that you have has a potential for coming into your life, coming into form. You start to get real cautious about having anything in your mind that isn't going to work for you. And you begin to question why you would keep any of those thoughts in you. I can remember one story of a woman who came to me one time and told me how miserable she was, that she was married to a drunk. And I said, well, what's wrong? And she said, well, he slurs his words and he repeats himself and he smells bad and it's just awful to be around him. And I said, let's see if I understand. Let's see who's crazy in this little scenario you've just described. Now, you said you've married to a drunk. And the drunk slurs his words, and he repeats himself, and he smells bad, and he sounds foolish. I said, that's every drunk I've ever known does exactly that. We got a drunk who's acting and doing everything that you would expect a drunk to do. Now we got you. And you're married to someone that you call a drunk, and you're expecting him to be sober. Now who's crazy? The drunk who's doing what he's supposed to? Or you who's expecting someone who is what you've defined him to be something different than what they are? He is what he is. And why would you want to why would you want to keep thoughts in your mind that are making you miserable, which is going to expand misery for you in your life by just having those thoughts there? Why not change around those thoughts and tell yourself that if you argue for your misery, then the only thing you're going to get is your misery. You have to get that, and you're arguing for it all the time. You're going around talking about how miserable you are. So you want to get real careful about that. And I suggest to every one of you that whatever it is you find yourself incapable of doing, or whatever you found that has been a great obstacle, or whatever it is that's in a relationship that isn't working, that you just can't seem to transcend, or whatever's going on with a particular employee or a way that you're approaching anything in your business, that if you examine, just for a moment, if you examine what belief is it that supports this behavior, because the ancestor to every action is a belief, is a thought, and then work at re-examining that. I hope it is as obvious to you as it is to me that the collective ego will benefit when we transcend our individual egos. You, as a single individual, have a sacred quest. That quest involves coming to your higher spiritual nature and inviting it to show you the way of the sacred self in your daily life. This means denying the demands of your ego if those demands contradict the guidance of your higher self. Our world is a collection of individuals urged on by the loving presence within all of us to achieve the sacred quest personally and collectively. The world will become a peaceful, fulfilled, cooperative, loving, truthful, tolerant, and pure environment as the individual parts that make up the collective consciousness restrain their egos. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. The whole behaves precisely as does its individual parts. Many people I speak to tell me that they feel powerless to affect the global community. They believe that, given the scope of the world's problems, their efforts are so infinitesimal as to be insignificant. They simply are not seeing that it is precisely through a change in individual consciousness that the world will be transformed. All of the problems that we face as a group reflect those we have individually. The world is encountering a spiritual deficit that reflects our need to consciously get on the path of our sacred quest. The solution to individual and global problems is to overcome the spiritual deficit. When you make the shift in consciousness, allowing yourself to be an agent of heightened awareness, you are contributing to the transformation of our world. You are not separate from the other souls on this planet. You share the identical energy that embodies the souls of Rwanda and Pakistan, for example. You are the lamp, and God is the electricity. It flows through you as surely as it flows through all living things. When you make the decision to choose the guidance of your higher self over your false self, you have plugged into the divine inner energy. When you run your life based on the principles of the higher self, you are contributing to the transformation of the entire world. You must strengthen your will to choose the sacred path when your ego calls you a fool for believing there could ever be a world without war. If your ego can convince you, you will become part of the collective ego's falseness. Individuals who choose ego propaganda are individuals who will build more bombs and manufacture more weapons. Currently, there are some 6 billion people on the planet. About 3 million are at war or in skirmishes that cause them to kill and torture each other. But that means that there are 5,997,000,000 who are not at war. This is a hopeful statistic, which our egos do not want us to consider. By contrast, the collective ego strives to keep the populace nervously on the edge with reminders to view the world in terms of us versus them. This ego viewpoint not only reinforces the insane escalation of ways to kill each other, but is also responsible for most of our social problems. The world ego is our false self, and this is the primary characteristic that we need to recognize. We want to believe that we are our physical bodies, and that the territories we occupy are so important that we are willing to kill each other in order to maintain those boundary lines. We have become convinced that our true identities are located in tribal ancestries, traditions, histories, genealogies, and the color and shape of our bodies. We have lost sight of our authentic identities because of the labels that our egos have assigned to us. Our egos have coalesced into a worldwide false perception of ourselves based on an unwillingness to know our true spiritual nature. Although all of our spiritual leaders have reminded us of our divinity and implored and even commanded us to love one another, the world ego has won this battle and produced ancient enmities and uncountable horrors in the long history of humanity. As you travel the path of your sacred quest, you will help to dispel the absurdity of specialness that the ego so assiduously promotes. You will see an end to this kind of thinking in your life and on a worldwide scale as well. The higher part of ourselves that I have talked about on this tape reacts to a vision that is infinite. This is assuredly not the vision of the ego. The ego is just as cowardly on a collective scale as it is on an individual basis. The world ego is frightened of a mass appeal to overcome our spiritual deficit. When people face inward and embrace a more loving perspective, the power of the sacred self will create change not only in the community but in the entire world as well. The world ego will do all that it can to prevent this kind of inner approach. It will ridicule those who promote meditation, peaceful demonstrations, and the love of God as a way out of the morass of social evils. It is just as true on the collective level as it is on the individual plane. The higher self urges you to simplify and to avoid contributing to anything that hurts others or increases the separation from your spiritual source. When Madame Blavatsky talked about who the leaders of the spiritual revolution would be, she said that these leaders will be ordinary people, regular, everyday folks, school teachers, musicians, artists, cab drivers, regular folks. And these people will speak out with a voice. And this voice will be heard. And then the bureaucracies will fall in line and begin to reflect what it is that this consciousness is instituting in our people. And if you look at the people who have been instrumental in changing consciousness in the last 25 years, you look at the people whose programs you listen to through Nightingale Congress and ask what are their backgrounds. You find out that they're salesmen. Marianne Williamson was a singer, a nightclub singer. Louise Hay was a dancer. Dennis Waitley was a salesman. Zig Ziglar was a preacher. People who just did everyday, regular things. I was a school teacher. And somehow there's a power, there's a pressure, there's something that has come and put us in a position of just talking about this kind of shift, this kind of consciousness. Let me share with you from my heart. I have 6 daughters and 2 sons.
but I have a 16-year-old daughter, the only child that we have who has taken a different path in her life. And we've struggled with it. And she had a very serious automobile accident. She had to be cut out of the car. She has taken a path of drinking and experimenting in drugs and so on. And I know that this is a path, and it's a very painful path, and she's had some very difficult times with it. And she's got a whole thing about authority and doing things her own way and so on. And I understand it, because I've lived it my whole life. And every time, I must say that in the last 3 or 4 months, there's been just incredibly dramatic shifts in our life. And it's because there has been a shift in how I and my wife are dealing with this. And I used to, when I would think about her, I would be filled with rage and filled with pain. And I would be tearful, and I'd be angry at the dumb choices that she would make and the things that she would do that just didn't seem to make sense. And I don't know if you've raised teenage daughters, but I saw a wonderful title for a book about raising teenage daughters. It said, Get Out of My Life. That was the title. But first, drive me and Cheryl to the mall. All right? It's a great book, by the way. And so I would be in my mind, and I'd be thinking about it, and I would try meditating, and I'd try working on it, and so on. And nothing seemed to work. And then I began to study this Foundations of Mysticism, this series of lectures by Joel Goldsmith, this great healer, lived back in the 1950s, wrote the Parentheses in Eternity and the Infinite Way. Wonderful, wonderful readings. He was a Christian Scientist and a very big supporter of chiropractic as well. And he talked about how we nullify disorder, disease, disharmony, and so on. And that, a reminder, the Spirit gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. These words that I say unto you are spirit. And he said, getting down on your knees and asking God to heal you, or getting down on your knees and asking God to grant you abundance where scarcity resides, getting down on your knees and asking God for anything is a foolish mission. Because the assumption behind asking God to give you something is that God already has it, but he's holding it back. He said, Luke 15:31 says, all that I have is thine. It's all yours already. And you are already connected to all that I have. And God, he said, isn't going to be doing anything different 1 hour from now than God is doing now. And God isn't going to be doing anything different an hour from now than God was doing 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. God is the infinite now. Don't assume that God is a withholding God. If I had the keys to healing you, to giving you abundance, to giving you a great relationship, to providing a job for you, whatever it is that you would like, and I held it all back, unless you begged for it or obeyed the rules that I said you must obey, you would say, you know, you're really not even a very nice person, let alone a very nice God. He said you must know that you're connected to it already, and that the disease, the disharmony, the discord will be nullified, will be wiped out when you bring spirit to it. And as I would think about my daughter and the rage, I would feel myself as I was plugged into the physical, the laws of the material. And I would, in my own mind, I would unplug myself from the material, and I would plug myself into God. It's a wonderful mental image when things aren't going the way you would like them to go. Just unplug yourself from the laws of the physical, especially where there's disharmony, disorder, disease, and plug into God. And what you do when you plug into God is you bring love, you bring pardon, you bring hope, you bring joy, you bring fulfillment to that, and you correct the error, and it's gone. I had a friend who was diagnosed with cancer and told that she had just a few months to live. And she knew that she was in disharmony. And she didn't even tell her parents. She didn't tell anyone. She knew what she had to do. She had read all the spiritual literature. She had immersed herself in meditation and deep prayer. but still she was surrounded by and contaminated by the energy field of those who were living in fear and without faith. And she left and she rented a cabin up in Wisconsin, in northern Wisconsin. And she went there all alone. And in the process, what she knew she had to do for 8 to 10 hours a day, every day, was to just reconnect to her source. And in the process of doing this, of just communing with God and just bringing peace, she came back from there a cleansed and whole person, and a healed person as well. It is in the bringing of spirit to disease. And that's why I say and said to you at the very beginning, you must be operating at a different level.
And while I don't think that it's very possible for most of us to ever completely get rid of this ego, as long as we're incarnated into a human form, I do believe that it is possible for us to tame it and to make it less of a dominant force in our lives by no longer having such an important role placed on being right and making other people wrong. One of the ways to begin to work at treasuring your divinity is to practice being kind rather than being right in as many occasions as you possibly can. And you have lots of opportunities to do this on a daily basis. Thousands of them show up in little tiny interactions in virtually every place you go, with strangers, with your children, with your spouses, on the telephone, ordering something in a restaurant, whatever. There's always this part of us that is the ego that wants to be right, that wants to make the dust rise from the earth with your swagger. And you know, after a while, you start noticing it. You start observing it. As your own ego becomes less and less of a dominant force in your life, you start to notice how much other people's ego is playing such a role, how much strutting there is, how much posturing there is, how much bragging takes place. You can see it in body language. You can see it in the way that people deal with each other. You can see it in lines at the grocery store. You can see it when you're trying to get your ticket straightened out at the airport, whatever it might be. There's this placing somebody else in a position of inferiority, and you are here to do this for me, and I'm more important than. And it isn't said that way, but it's sort of communicated. And you think to yourself that all of these people, I do it all the time, all of these people are nothing more than me in an earlier time in my life. That this is the way I was. I see it in my past relationships. I see it in the way that I dealt with my children years ago and the way that I deal with them now. I see it in noticing that it's easier now for me to be kind and to suspend being right. And I'm right almost all the time. But I no longer need to point it out, except for right now, of course. But the idea that even if you know that when you're talking to someone that they're completely wrong, if you can suspend the need to point it out and instead just say something kind back in response, if you can just practice doing that wherever you are, those are points towards treasuring your divinity. It's not about worshiping more. It's not about getting down on your knees and practicing somebody else's orthodoxy. It's not about fitting in. It's not about memorizing verses out of the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or whatever. It's not about that. It's about practicing being Christ-like rather than Christian. It's about practicing being Buddha-like rather than Buddhist. It's about practicing being Muhammad-like rather than Muslim. Muhammad said, don't even harm any tree that has a green leaf growing on it. If there's a green leaf growing on it, don't harm it. Practice that. That kind of love and admiration for humanity. Live as much as you can those principles. And all it amounts to is simply beginning a process of moving out of the lowest levels of consciousness. The lowest level of consciousness is ego consciousness. Ego, some have suggested EGO, is an acronym for edging God out. That as you edge God out of your life, what you have done is you have separated yourself from your divinity, believed that you are those 6 things, separate from everyone, separate from what you would like to attract into your life, separate from God, your reputation. You start believing that this is who you are, and you start living this way, and you look upon your divinity as something that is out there that you'll see, you'll talk to on at the synagogue on Saturday or at church on Sunday morning or whatever. And you'll practice during certain days, like we call, at the end of the year, 30 days of fasting, and this makes me, closer to God and so on. To me, it's about applying the principles of moving past ego consciousness. And when I see conflicts between one group and another, men versus women, when I see conflicts between people who are older and people who are younger, when you see conflicts existing between people who have one color skin and a different color of skin, when you see conflicts between people who wear a robe versus those who wear a yarmulke, when you see all of these divisions, and there are just endless numbers of them that we pigeonhole ourselves into, they are still the cause of virtually all conflicts on the planet. We still are dividing ourselves. We don't understand that this is a round planet, and on a round planet, there's no choosing up sides. There are no sides.
Mindfulness just is, Here's one of the Thich Nhat Hanh's quotes. He says, "Walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet." It's a practice of putting your mind and your consciousness onto exactly where you are in the moment, and being able to find beauty. It's one of the great teachings that I learned as a young man is that looking at beauty in the world is the very first step in purifying the mind. To be able to find beauty. I remember the story I told of Viktor Frankl when I was with him in 1978 on a panel in Vienna. The great Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and he said that they would give. We had lunch after that, just the two of us. I was very, very touched, and it was one of the most memorable moments of my life. And he said to me, when we were given a bowl of dirty water with a floating fish head in it, and that was our protein for the day. And he said you had to be able to find a way to find beauty in that. He said when we're challenged with circumstances over which we have absolutely no control, that we're challenged to change ourselves. And instead of looking at this as poor me and this shouldn't be happening and isn't this awful, but looking at it in terms of this is where I am. This is where I am in this moment. And in this moment, I'm going to find beauty in this and be in a state of appreciation for this fish, for it's giving its life to me. It's allowing me to survive and so on. And he said the people, he told me, and I'll never forget this, he said the people in the concentration camps, this was in Auschwitz, in Poland, he said the people who couldn't find beauty in the circumstances that they were in, the horrible circumstances that they were in, he said they would always perish. He said, you've got to be able to see beauty. The famous line from John Keats in Ode on a Grecian Urn, beauty is truth, and truth is beauty. That's all you need to know on earth. That's all you know on earth, and all you need to know. And so that this ability, and that's what mindfulness is. It's walking on the earth and kissing the ground with your feet with each step that you take and becoming aware of it. He talks frequently about being able to find beauty in just drying a dish. Yeah, a lot of people sit down, and while they're while they're sitting down for a meal, they're already thinking about what they're going to have for dessert, and instead of just being there in this moment. If this is the appetizer and this is the bite that I'm taking, and and this is what I'm tasting in this moment, and to find beauty in virtually everything that there is in you. It's this way of making the mind pure.
Every beauty which is seen here below, down here below, by persons of perception, resembles more than anything else that celestial source from which we all come. Isn't that great? Every beauty that we see resembles more than anything else that source. We're talking about source, connecting to source, from which we all come. Do you see beauty? Do you see it more or less in your life? Can you find it in a homeless person urinating on the street? Can you find beauty in a cockroach? As you reach higher levels of consciousness, you begin to see, not only do you see beauty everywhere and in everything, you begin to recognize it as truth.
And, you know, you can look around, whoever you are, listening wherever you are on this planet right now. Look out your window, or look to your right, or look to your left, wherever you are, you know, in a little room someplace, or sitting on a beach somewhere, or driving in your car, or whatever it may be, and just look around. What I want to say to all of you is that, you know, the very first step in purifying your mind and moving into higher levels of consciousness and recognizing the eternal, infinite consciousness that you are, is to look at beauty in the world and see it in as many places as you can. And if you're a writer, you write a poem about it. I mean, there's 3 or 4 poems in there right now that and if I were if Rumi were here listening, and maybe he is, maybe that was Rumi, you know, in the, because I have such a love affair with his poetry. Maybe it was Rumi walking across my balcony on the railing, saying, "Find beauty in me." Just one of the strangest experiences that I've had, and that all came from Thich Nhat Hanh. And since we had that experience, and since I was reading him this week, I've been finding beauty in everything, you know, in every little bird that flies by, and every person that's out there, and every wave that shows up, and so on.
One, it seems to me, that is most important is that a leader is someone who sees the connection to the whole, the oneness, the unity. And followers rarely do. And you can get leaders from people who are in positions of followers if you look for these 2 qualities. The first is seeing the big picture, if you will, or the connection to the whole. Leaders always seem to see that. Whereas followers, if you've got a large corporation, within a department, the follower is somebody who only sees their job and what they have to do. So they get trained to do this particular thing, and they don't really see how it impacts on the next department, and on the next department, and on the entire company, and on the entire corporate structure. They're not able to see that. They will say things like, "It's not my department. I don't do those kind of things. It's not my responsibility. You have to go to the accounting department to get at that. Or you'll have to call shipping, or whatever it may be." And they stay that way. It's like they have that quality, and they almost stay that way their entire lives. There's no connection to the whole. Whereas a leader will see that everything that a person does within a department, not only how it affects them in the department, but how it affects the next department, and how it affects the entire business, and how it affects the profit picture, and so on. And so you will see leaders being conscious of the entire business unit. And that person will almost always elevate up to a point where they get to the top of the business or in positions of leadership, because they're not just narrowly looking at how what I do affects just me. The second thing is that leaders, as opposed to followers, are people who see the long range effect of everything that is being done. They don't look at just how I'm acting today. For example, if you're getting on an airplane and a flight attendant is rude to a customer, the leader, if they're sitting there looking at that, or even if they're a flight attendant who has these leader qualities, not only sees how that impacts on the entire organization, the entire airline, but they see how that impacts on future business as well. A year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. If I have a bad experience with a person on an airline,
that turns me off to them. It isn't that individual that I'm going to be turned off to because they're just out of my life now. So the next time I'm going to make a reservation, I'm going to pick a different airline if there's one available. I might do that for 10 years. So that one tiny moment of truth that you have as a follower with a customer, if that person doesn't see the whole and doesn't also see the long range thing, will affect them dramatically. And leaders always seem to know that. And so they're not just being polite and service-oriented and kind and decent to people because that's what they've been trained to do. They are being that way, first of all, because that's the way they are. That's the way they think. And as a result of the way they think, they see their connection to not only the organization and the future of the organization, they see a bigger picture. And that's really what this is about, this whole program, what we're talking about here. That's what the whole thing is about. It's like seeing the biggest picture of all, that how you behave towards your fellow man not only affects you and them and the organization and the profit picture a year from now or 2 years from now, but it affects all of us. It affects all of mankind. It's that big a picture that I'm trying to get at here. Yes, there are little tiny segments that we may be more interested in, but that makes us followers too, when you think about it. I mean, if you're only thinking about your airline or you're only thinking about your company and how their behavior impacts on the organization or in the future, then you're still limiting yourself because it also impacts on your city or your community, and it impacts on your country, and it impacts on the world, and it impacts on all of humanity, and it impacts on the universe as well. I work for myself. I'm not in anybody else's business. I see the biggest picture of all, that ripples throughout all of humanity. And you can bring it back down to apply these principles in your daily business and in your family and in your relationship, but you can expand them outward as well, so that you begin to see that every negative act, every hostile act, everything that is not in harmony that you do, every person who is not in harmony, that person cannot cooperate with the person next to him. He will want to gobble them up like a cancer. And when they are in harmony, and enough of us get into harmony, then it impacts on the entire planet. So we have to be able to extend our vision. If we're thinking of ourselves as leaders, it's one thing to be a great leader within your corporation, or even within your department, or even within your own family. But another thing completely to be a great leader of mankind. And we all have to see ourselves that way. We have to extend out as far as we can and back down as small as we can. And that's how it impacts on everything and everyone.
Do I pray as if my prayers are already realized? The traditional means of prayer that I was exposed to throughout my life involved asking for something and hoping that an external God would provide me with the answers for my wishes. A close friend and colleague of mine, Greg Braden, who is also a student and admirer of Neville, writes in his penetrating book, The Isaiah Effect, "Rather than asking that the outcome of our prayer come to pass, we acknowledge our role as an active part of creation and give thanks for what we are certain that we have created. Whether we see immediate results or not, our thanks acknowledge that somewhere in creation our prayer has already been fulfilled." Unquote. This may appear to contradict the ask and you shall receive version of prayer that you are likely exposed to. It may feel new, but it is so important that you acknowledge your own divine role in the fulfillment of your spiritually aligned desires for yourself and others. A vision is within your imagination as you enter into your sacred practice of prayer, one that is so strong you can already feel its fulfillment in your own body. To once again quote Neville, quote, "The moment you accept the wish as an accomplished fact, the subconscious finds means for its realization. To pray successfully, then, you must yield to the wish, that is, feel the wish fulfilled." Unquote. Being a piece of God, and therefore altogether God, as a part of the entire process of creation, you become an active participant in your own private prayerful moments. Consider shutting out your senses completely, along with all of the evidence they continually place before you, because you are, in your prayers, going to attempt to feel what they, that is, your senses, will most assuredly deny. Perhaps describing what I do will help you. When I pray, I always yield to the wish that I have for myself, my loved ones, and the entire planet, and all of its inhabitants, rather than attempting to force my wish or to have God take over and do my bidding for me. In my mind, I see my wishes as accomplished, and I experience what that feels like, savoring the feeling in my body. I stay in a profound state of gratitude. My prayer is without effort. Rather, it is felt as an already accomplished fact. I then act as if what it is I am praying for is my truth, even if my senses and all those about me give evidence to the contrary. I'm not asking for special favors because I do not believe in an ego-constructed deity who plays favorites, or who has the ability to heal everyone, yet withholds these favors because he or she is looking for something from me. I'm a part of the entire business of creation. I am divine consciousness, and I never forget it. I know I have the capacity to make conscious contact with my source of creation. There's no fear of insulting a mythical God. In the I Am Discourses, Saint Germain says, quote, I say to the students in all sincerity, there is no possible way of attaining a quality or a desired attribute without claiming it, unquote. With this in mind, I claim peace, health, happiness, joy, prosperity for everyone I know in my life. I claim peace and contentment for myself, for humanity, and the entire world. In my prayers, I give thanks for my mysterious role in all of this, and I reprogram my subconscious mind so I feel this in my body. I leave my sacred prayer time and go about the activities of my life, whatever they may be, with this feeling within me. I am not discouraged by what my senses might be reporting. I have left all ideas of time and timing behind, and I trust in the I Am presence that is my true identity. Often at night I engage in prayerful visualization. I visualize faces of people I know who have crossed over and left the outer world, people I've seen in the media but have never met, and people I knew as a child. I surround them with love. I see the love, and I feel it for them and myself. I am calling in the I Am presence. As the I Am Discourses teach, quote, the undesirable moves out and the I Am presence moves in, and you find that you have truly entered into a new world, filled with the happiness and perfection you have always known existed somewhere within your own heart, unquote. This is prayer to me, and when I emerge from these moments of prayer, it's as if I've attended a movie and seen the successful end of the film, even though I may not have been shown precisely how that ending was achieved. This is not only the great power of prayer, it is also the power of a wishes-fulfilled life. No ego, no force, no special privileges, simply an awareness of the power that exists within us when we assume that what we pray for, always aligned with our highest selves, is a completed fact. We are, each and every one of us, a participant in this dance of creation.
What I call authentic prayer is inviting divine desire to express itself through myself. It expresses my experience of oneness with the divine energy. This may sound like a radical or even blasphemous notion, but is the source of all spiritual traditions. Here's a few examples. In Christianity, they say the kingdom of heaven is within you. In Islam, they say those who know themselves know their God. In Buddhism, they say, look within, you are the Buddha. In Vedanta, they say, Atman, or individual consciousness, and Brahman, universal consciousness, are one. Yoga says God dwells within you as you. Confucianism, heaven, earth, and human are of one body. And in the Upanishads, the ancient texts of the Hindus, by understanding the self, all this universe is known. Trust, then, is the cornerstone of my praying, and with it comes the peace that is the essence of manifesting.
The famous Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard once said that once you label me, you negate me. And our past is filled with labels about what we can and can't do. I'm not very good at this. I'm not athletic. I'm not musical. I'm not able to do certain kinds of activities. I don't have a good memory. I'm not very good at mathematics. I've never been good at relating to other people. I'm shy. I'm nervous. I'm clumsy. These are all labels
from the wake, from our past. And all of them are just things that you have used as an explanation or as an excuse for why you don't move into a different place in your life. And they all revolve around this thing called failure. I tried them, I wasn't good at them, therefore I failed. And when you give up your personal history, you give up the concept of failure. It is, again, another illusion. You have never failed at anything in your life. Everything you've ever done has produced a result. You are just out there producing results. The issue isn't whether you fail. The issue is, what do I do and what have I done with the results that I have produced? So that if you go to, I love that story that I heard not too long ago of a little boy who was walking, and you know how little boys do it? I used to do it all the time, and you take a softball and you throw it up into the air, and then you have a bat, which is often a stick, it was for us, and you swing at it like this, and the little boy throws the ball up into the air, and he swings, and he misses. So he picks the ball up again, and he walks a little further, and nobody's around, and he throws the ball up into the air, and he swings again, and the ball falls to the ground. He misses. Then he picks up the ball again, and he looks around, and nobody's there, and he throws it up into the air, and he swings his stick. It misses again and hits the floor, the ground. And he responds, "What a pitcher." It's the idea that you can never fail at anything. And I can't tell you how many endless clients that I have told, you have never failed at anything in your life. If you weigh 300 pounds, and you've weighed 300 pounds for the last 20 years, you have just produced enormous results. And the question isn't, why am I such a failure? Why have I always been obese? Why have I always been these terrible things that are back there in the past that I'm bonded to, and now coming up with reasons to explain it away? Well, my mother, we have this, and then I'm doing it in response to that, and this is because of that. And you can come up with an endless number of reasons. I was talking about this last night, that my brother and I both lived in the same foster homes, in the same orphanage for years. And my one brother is very shy and very reserved and has had a great deal of difficulty. And I've been out there, very public and very outgoing and so on. And both of us can explain our behavior on the basis of the same experience. Obviously, I have self-confidence because I never had anybody to give me confidence when I was young. And I was always going from place to place, so I had to go within and rely upon myself. And my brother would say, obviously, I don't have any confidence because I didn't have anybody to give me any confidence when I was young. There was nobody there, so that's the way my life is. And you can explain anything away. But if you're that 300-pounder, you have produced results. The question is, what are you doing with the results that you've produced? What are you going to do about that? Are you going to be a great pitcher and remind yourself of this is a different way to look at that? Or are you going to tell yourself that my personal history is such that there's nothing I can do about it? If you want to walk the extra mile, the path less traveled, give up your personal history. If you don't have a story, you won't have to live up to it. And you can live every moment in the only place where you'll ever come to know what it's like to be connected and united with God. It's the only place God ever is or ever has been. Right here, now. Don't use your weaknesses, your struggles, your difficulties, the things that happen to you as a calling card. Sharing it with everybody else and using it as a way to get sympathy for yourself. If you've been through a divorce, if you're a widow, if you've been through cancer, if you've been, whatever it is, don't use that as a way to get attention for yourself. Because what it'll do is it'll keep you bonded back here. And it'll also give you more of an opportunity to repeat and attract the very thing that you're still upset about.
Sounds have power. Now, again, this often will fly in the face of that which we have been taught by our ego mind. The beauty of sound is that there are different dimensions. There's the dimension of the world of form that we all are experiencing, that we're all in, all right? What our bodies and our chairs and our beds and our houses and all of that. There's that world of form, and that's a vibration. It vibrates at a certain speed. And then there's the other level of way, way, way up past that called the etheric level, which is another vibration, the world of thought and the world of spirit. In between there's an intermediary dimension. And that intermediary dimension between the world of form and the world of spirit or thought is the vibration of sound. And sound is our access to those higher, faster vibrations of speed and thought. So that even though we can't see sound, we can measure it pretty well with scopes and so on. We can tell how fast the vibrations go. Through sound, we can leave the world of form and use it as a vehicle for getting to that level of divine intelligence, which is vibrating at a very, very, like trillions and trillions and trillions of times per second, versus sound, which is between 30,000 vibrations and, say, 16,000 vibrations, whatever it is. So think about sounds like this. And certain sounds, therefore, have different capacities than other sounds. And there are certain sounds that are associated with this ability to be able to manifest. And if you learn these sounds and practice these sounds and meditate to these sounds, you will begin to access and make contact with the higher vibrational frequencies beyond the world of form. And so what Guruji explained to me is that there are two essential chakras in the body to be concerned with in terms of manifesting. One is called the root chakra, the base chakra, or the sex center. And the root chakra then has a channel, an internal invisible channel that goes from the base chakra to the third eye. And the third eye is the place that is located on your forehead between your eyebrows. Okay? And you think of this as a chakra or as an opening or as a computer terminal, if you will, that has been closed over. And to be able to radiate out energy from the third eye while meditating and sending that energy out into the world is one of the ways that we practice manifestation. And he said that there are two sounds to think about. One sound is the sound of creation. And the sound of creation, it's interesting, he encouraged me to look up the names that we have come up with throughout history for the Creator. Ra, Krishna, Rama, Buddha, Wakantanka, Adonai, Brahma, Siddha, Ahura Mazda, Shiva, Jehovah, Yahweh, God, Atto, Allah. And what is the sound that is with each and every one of these? The sound of Ah. This sound of creation, the sound of Ah, is the sound of God. And it is a vibration like everything else that is mediation between the world of matter and the world of spirit. And it is the only sound that you make that requires no effort. As I open my mouth and make the sound Ah, notice that if I move anything, I change the sound. But if I move nothing, I have the sound of Ah, and it's the only sound that requires no effort. So it's Ah. Now as I move it, do you see what happens? The minute that I move anything, the sound stops. It's not an accident that this sound is in the names for all creators, because sounds originated with ancient sages vocalizing what they heard in their meditations. This sound of Ah. It is the repetition of the sound of God. And I'm going to put this energy of Ah out into the universe. And as I do, I am going to attract to myself, through the power of creation, the way that you unite your mind, which is on the left-hand side, with the self, which is on the right-hand side. The way that you do this is through the use of the sound of Ah. There's also another sound, and this second sound is the sound of all that has been manifested in the world. This is your meditation of gratitude. If you take anything in the physical plane and reduce it down to its basic sound and put it on a scope and measure that sound, you will hear the sound of Om. The sound of Om. It is the universal sound. It is the sound of gratitude. In the evening meditation, you also repeat the sound of Om. But you don't ask for anything. You just send out your gratitude for all that has manifested in your life. And you will feel an enormous sense of peace and joy.
If you wish to become a divine immortal angel, that is, to live your life at meaning from a God-realized perspective, then restore the angelic qualities of your being through virtue and service. The Tao Te Ching, Te means virtue. This, and I underline this emphatically, this is the only way to gain the attention of the immortals who teach the methods of energy enhancement and integration that are necessary to reach the divine realm. This is the only way to gain the attention of the immortals, of the angels, of the divine intelligence, of that which has gone before you, of God, whatever you want to call it. You know that there's guidance out there. You know that when you have passion for something, that passion is really the presence of God within you. When you feel something so strongly that you can't ignore it, that you just have to be it. I hope you're thinking about what your calling is, just what it is, regardless of whether you've actualized it, fulfilled it, whether it's an empty pipe dream, whatever it is. Just think about it. Just think about it. What it is that you feel in here that just won't go away, that calls you to something. And if you want to gain the attention and get the help, the guidance that you want, this is what Carl Jung meant when he talked about synchronicity, that as you elevate, as you get closer and closer to this divine realm, what happens is that the right people suddenly began to start showing up. The right idea begins to come along. What I call in the film, the quantum moment begins to happen. That vivid, surprising, benevolent, enduring idea that comes to you. Now, how does the guidance get here? These angelic teachers cannot be sought out. In other words, you can sit here and meditate all day long and sit here and pray and hope and ask for the guidance of these teachers to come to you, and according to Lao Tzu, you'll never find them. The only way to gain the attention of the immortals who reach the methods of energy enhancement and integration is to start living your life through virtue and service. And when I made that shift and began to realize that my life was really about serving, because that's all you can do. If you can imagine God with hands, just try to imagine God with hands. And ask yourself, what does God do with his hands? What is the only thing that God can do with his hands? The God that you know. The Tao, the source that is responsible for all of creation and welcomes all of creation back. What does God do with God's hands? Creation is already complete, as you'll hear this afternoon. It's already complete. And it's just constantly giving, isn't it? It's just about giving. Does God ever say, I want something back from you? Yeah. I give you life, you got to give me this. But God just says, here is life, Here are the birds, here are the trees, here's the sky, here's the water, here's the ocean, here's the universe. Here it is. What do I want back? Nothing. You know, Hafiz, the great Persian poet, said, even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, you owe me. Just think what a love like that can do. It lights up the whole world. It almost sounds too simple, but when I made that shift, it started chasing after me. It always has chased after me, but my ego would get in the way and think that this was about me. But when I really was able to suspend that ego, these angelic teachers cannot be sought out. It is they who seek out the students. Now here it comes. This is the part that blows me away. I've been leading up to this. When you succeed in connecting your energy, who you are, with the divine realm, which is what this whole program has been about, reconnecting you to the divine realm, the one that you originated from, the one to which you will return, through higher awareness and the practice of undiscriminating virtue, which is what the Tao Te Ching is, the transmission of the ultimate subtle truths will follow. This is the path that all angels take to the divine realm. That all of those of us who would like to get to this place of living a life of meaning, this is the path that they take. When you succeed in allowing yourself to live from a place of higher awareness, the ego and higher awareness can't coexist. Eckhart Tolle writes a lot about this. Higher awareness is really thinking like God thinks. That's all you have to do.